For the price of a broken appliance, for the sum of $200 he did not owe, Elias Vance was being thrown into the street. The landlord, a man named Silas Croft, with a perpetually sour face and a ledger where his heart should have been, saw only a quiet, disposable tenant. He saw the worn-out work clothes, the calloused hands, the way Elias kept his gaze fixed on the floor. Croft saw a man who was already defeated. He never imagined that this broken man, this forgotten handyman living in the building's smallest unit, held the power to shatter his entire world. Would this quiet man fade into the cold city night, another ghost swallowed by the concrete canyons, or would he return and become the one thing Croft feared most, his master? The world of Elias Vance had shrunk to the size of apartment 1B and the long, dim hallways of the Emberside. The building was aptly named, a place where lives smoldered but never quite caught fire, slowly turning to ash. It was a 5-story brick monolith from a forgotten decade, its facade stained with the tears of 100 leaky gutters. The lobby smelled of damp wool and stale cleaning fluid. Elias knew the smell intimately. He was the one who pushed the mop. He was the building's part-time handyman, a role he'd taken in exchange for a reduction on his already meager rent. His own apartment was a testament to his self-imposed exile. It was a single room with a cot, a hot plate, and a small, square window that looked out onto a graffiti-scarred brick wall. There were no photographs, no books, no decorations. It was a space designed for waiting, not for living. It was a cell, and he was both its prisoner and its warden. He had furnished it with the barest essentials, a reflection of the life he felt he deserved. He kept his head down, did his work, and spoke only when spoken to. The silence was his armor, the anonymity, his sanctuary. He had once designed buildings that scraped the sky, structures of glass and steel that reshaped skylines. He was Elias Vance, the prodigy, the visionary architect whose name was synonymous with daring innovation. He had a firm, a fortune, a future that seemed limitless. Then came the betrayal, a catastrophic failure engineered by a man he'd called his partner. It had cost him more than his company. It had cost him his name, his reputation, and his belief in the foundation of things. So he had vanished, taking what little he had salvaged and burying Elias Vance the architect, allowing Elias the handyman to be born from the rubble. He had chosen the Emberside precisely because no one would ever look for him there. It was a place for the forgotten, and he was determined to be forgotten. The $200 was a fiction, a phantom charge Croft had invented for emergency plumbing repairs in the unit above his. Elias knew for a fact the pipes were sound. He had inspected them himself a month prior. It was a shakedown, pure and simple. Croft practiced a form of predatory landlordism, squeezing his tenants for every possible cent, knowing most were too poor or too frightened to fight back. He would tack on late fees for rent that was on time, invent damages, and withhold security deposits for sport. "It's on the ledger, Vance," Croft had said that morning, his finger tapping a line in a grimy notebook. His office was a cramped space in the basement that smelled of mildew and cheap cigars. $200 for the pipe burst. You pay it with the rent, or you're out. End of story. Elias had simply looked at the man. He thought about the billions of dollars that sat dormant in accounts he hadn't touched in 3 years. He thought about the liquid assets, the portfolios, the sheer world-bending power of the fortune he had hidden away. He could buy this entire city block with the interest he earned in a month. The thought was a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. But he was no longer that man. That man was a ghost. "I didn't cause any damage," Elias had said, his voice quiet, raspy from disuse. Croft had laughed, a short barking sound. "Doesn't matter. The leak was above you. Building policy. You're responsible for what happens in your vertical line. Pay up or pack up." Elias knew it was a lie. There was no such policy. But to argue would be to draw attention. To fight would be to become visible. So he had nodded, a slow, tired gesture of surrender, and walked away. He had the money. He could pay the fraudulent fee and remain invisible. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. It was what he had been doing for 3 years. But something inside him, a small, stubborn ember, he thought, had long gone cold, resisted. It was the casual cruelty of it, the absolute certainty in Croft's eyes that he could do this, that Elias was nothing. Later that day, he was sweeping the third-floor hallway when he saw the source of his undoing. He was outside apartment 3C, and the door was ajar. He heard Croft's voice, sharp and laced with venom. "I'm not running a charity, Clara. The rent was due on the 1st. It is now the 5th. That's a $50 late fee, and I want the full amount by tomorrow, or the eviction notice goes up." Elias stopped sweeping. He stood perfectly still, listening. He knew Clara Reyes. She was a nurse's aide who worked double shifts at a nearby clinic. She lived in 3C with her 7-year-old daughter, Lily. Elias had seen them in the hallways, had watched the way Clara's tired face would light up whenever her daughter grabbed her hand. A woman's voice, strained but firm, replied, "I told you my paycheck was delayed. It will be in the bank tomorrow. I can give you the rent then, the $50. Can you just give me until the end of the week for that?" "No," Croft snapped. "Tomorrow, full amount, or you and the kid can find somewhere else to live. Maybe a shelter would be more your speed." A small gasp came from inside the apartment. Elias's hands tightened on the broom handle. He felt an old, unfamiliar anger stirring in his chest. It felt like waking a sleeping giant. He heard the sound of a little girl crying. "You're scaring my daughter," Clara said, her voice trembling with rage. "She should be scared," Croft sneered. "Maybe it'll teach you to be more responsible." The door slammed shut, and a moment later Croft stormed out, nearly colliding with Elias. "What are you looking at?" Croft snarled, his face flushed. "Get back to work." Elias didn't move. He just looked at the man, at the petty ugliness of him. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't look away. He held Croft's gaze until the landlord grew uncomfortable, grumbled under his breath, and stomped down the stairs. Elias stood there for a long moment, the broom forgotten in his hands. He heard the soft, muffled sounds of Clara comforting her daughter inside the apartment. That evening, as Elias sat on his cot staring at the brick wall, there was a soft knock on his door. He wasn't expecting anyone. No one ever knocked on his door. He opened it to find Clara standing there, holding a plate covered in foil. "Hi," she said, offering a small, tired smile. "I made too much arroz con pollo. Lily is a picky eater tonight. I thought you might want some to thank you." Elias was confused. "Thank me for what?" "For what you did with Mr. Croft," she said. "I saw you through the peephole, the way you just stood there. He's a bully. He backs down when he's not the one with all the power. You didn't back down, so thank you." She held out the plate. "It's still warm." He looked from her weary, kind face to the plate of food. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. It was an offering of warmth in his cold, sterile world. It was a connection, something he had been actively avoiding for years. He thought about refusing, about closing the door and preserving his isolation. But then he remembered the sound of her daughter crying. He reached out and took the plate. His calloused fingers brushed against hers. The foil was warm, just as she'd said. "Thank you," he said. The words felt foreign on his tongue. "You're Elias, right?" she asked. "I'm Clara, and my daughter is Lily." "I know," he said softly. He took a step back, ready to close the door. "Wait," she said. "The faucet in my bathroom sink. It's been dripping for weeks. I've told Mr. Croft 3 times, but he just ignores me. It's driving me crazy." She looked down, embarrassed. "I know it's not your job unless he tells you to, but is there any chance you could just look at it?" This was it, the choice. He could say no. He could say it was against the rules. He could retreat back into his shell where it was safe, or he could step out. He looked at her, at the dark circles under her eyes, the plea in her expression. He thought of Croft's sneering face. "I'll look at it," he said. A wave of relief washed over her face. "Oh, thank you. Really. Any time you have a moment." "I have a moment now," he said, surprising himself. He followed her up the 2 flights of stairs to her apartment. It was the opposite of his. It was small and cluttered, but it was filled with life. Colorful drawings were taped to the refrigerator. A stack of children's books sat on the coffee table. A half-finished puzzle was spread across the floor. It smelled like cinnamon. A little girl with big, brown eyes and dark pigtails peeked out from behind a worn armchair. "That must be Lily." "It's okay, Mija," Clara said gently. "This is Elias. He's going to fix the sink." Lily stared at him, her expression serious. Elias gave a short, awkward nod in her direction. He followed Clara into the small bathroom. The dripping was loud and incessant, a tiny, maddening drumbeat. He knelt and looked under the sink, his experienced eyes immediately diagnosing the problem. A worn-out washer, a 5-minute fix, a 50-cent part. He had a spare in his tool bag. He retrieved it from his apartment and returned. As he worked, he was aware of the little girl standing in the doorway, watching him. He tightened the packing nut, replaced the washer, and turned the handle. Silence! The maddening drip was gone. "You fixed it," Clara said, her voice filled with a gratitude that seemed far too large for such a small task. "It was just a washer," he mumbled, putting his tools away. "Mr. Croft was going to charge me $75 to have a plumber come," she said quietly. Elias stood up and turned to face her. He saw the struggle in her eyes, the constant grinding worry of a life lived on the edge of a financial cliff, and he saw a deep, unwavering decency. "He won't have to," Elias said. As he turned to leave, the little girl, Lily, stepped forward. She held up a small plastic horse. Its leg was broken, dangling at an odd angle. "Can you fix him too?" she asked, her voice a tiny whisper. "His name is Stardust." Elias looked down at the broken toy, then at the child's hopeful face. His first instinct was to say no, to retreat. This was getting complicated. This was involvement. But her eyes were so clear, so honest. They held no judgment, only a simple, profound trust that he was a person who could fix broken things. He took the toy horse from her. "I'll see what I can do," he said. Back in his sterile room, he ate the warm chicken and rice. It was the best meal he'd had in 3 years. Afterwards, he sat at his small table and, with a tube of industrial-grade epoxy from his toolbox, he carefully mended the leg of the plastic horse. He set the tiny patient aside to dry, securing the leg with a rubber band. As he worked, a strange feeling settled over him. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the absence of despair. It was a flicker of purpose, however small. He was fixing things. It was what he used to do on a grand scale. Maybe, he thought, the scale didn't matter as much as the act itself. The next day, he paid his rent, short the $200 Croft had demanded. He left the envelope in the drop box without a word. He knew it was a declaration of war. A few hours later, he knocked on Clara's door. When she opened it, he simply handed Stardust back to Lily, whose face broke into a radiant smile. "You fixed him," she cried, hugging the horse to her chest. "Thank you," Clara said, her eyes shining. "You have no idea how much that means." "He just needed some glue," Elias said, already backing away. But the connection was already forged. Over the next week, a new routine began to form. Lily would leave drawings for him outside his door, a lopsided sun, a picture of Stardust, a portrait of a tall, smiling man she labeled Elias the Fixer. He would find excuses to work on the 3rd floor, and sometimes Clara would open her door and offer him a cup of coffee. They talked. He learned that she had moved here after her husband left, that she was trying to save enough to find a better place in a better school district. She learned, well, she didn't learn much about his past. He kept that part of himself locked away. But she learned about the man he was now. She saw the gentleness behind his silence, the intelligence in his watchful eyes. "You're not like him," she said one afternoon, sipping her coffee while he leaned against the doorframe. "Croft, I mean. You're quiet, but you're not mean. There's a kindness in you." Elias didn't know how to respond. Kindness was a language he had forgotten how to speak. "He's a businessman," he said, the words feeling hollow. "He's a vulture," she corrected him. "He preys on people who can't fight back." She looked at him, her expression searching. "Why do you let him treat you like that? I know he gives you a hard time. I've heard him." The question hung in the air between them. Why? Because it was his penance. Because he deserved it. Because it was easier than being the man he used to be. He couldn't say any of that. "It's complicated," he finally said. "My life is complicated too," she replied softly. "That doesn't mean I let people walk all over me." Her words were a gentle challenge, but they hit him like a physical blow. He thought about the life he'd built, this fortress of quiet misery. He had thought it was a shield, but maybe it was just a cage. The official eviction notice arrived a week later. It was taped to his door, a stark white rectangle against the drab, painted wood. It cited failure to remit full rental and fee obligations, referencing the $200. He had 30 days to vacate the premises. He tore it down and crumpled it in his fist. A cold fury, clean and sharp, cut through the fog of his apathy. This wasn't just about him anymore. Croft's harassment had escalated not just toward him, but toward Clara as well. He'd seen the landlord nitpicking her for leaving Lily's stroller in the hall for 10 minutes, threatening her with fines for noise complaints that Elias knew were fabricated. Croft was punishing her for her association with him. He was using his power to isolate and hurt them both. That evening he went to see Clara. He found her in the small, shared laundry room in the basement, folding Lily's clothes. "He gave me the notice," he said, his voice flat. She stopped folding, her hands stilling on a small pink t-shirt. "Oh, Elias, I'm so sorry." She looked at him, her face etched with guilt. "This is my fault. If I hadn't asked you to fix the sink, if we hadn't." "No," he said, his tone firm. "This is not your fault. This is his fault. This is who he is." They stood in the humid air, the rhythmic churning of the washing machine filling the silence. "What will you do?" she asked. He thought about his options. He could leave, disappear again. Find another forgotten corner in another run-down building. It would be the easiest path. But then he looked at Clara, at her strong, tired face, and he thought of Lily's trusting smile. Leaving felt like betrayal. It felt like the old Elias Vance, the one who ran. "I'm not sure yet," he lied, because in that moment a new idea, a wild and audacious plan, was beginning to form in his mind. It was the kind of plan the old Elias Vance would have made. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He took out $200 and held it out to her. "This is for you," he said, "for the late fee he charged you and for next month, just in case." She stared at the money, then back at him, her eyes wide. "Elias, I can't take this," he said. "Let me do this. Let me fix something." She hesitated, then slowly took the money, her fingers brushing his again. "What about you?" she whispered. "What about your eviction?" "I'm going to handle it," he said, and for the first time in a long time, he believed it. In the days that followed, Elias became a ghost of a different sort. He performed his handyman duties with mechanical precision, but his mind was elsewhere. He was gathering information. He spent hours in the public library, not reading novels, but poring over city property records on a public computer. He traced the ownership of the Emberside. It was held by a shell corporation, Croft Properties LLC. He dug deeper, peeling back the layers of legal fiction. He made a single encrypted call from a payphone to a man in Geneva, a man who had managed his finances with monastic discretion for years. "I need a complete workup on a small real estate entity," Elias had said, his voice clipped and professional, a voice he hadn't used in years. and I need you to prepare a significant liquidation of certain assets. I'm going to be making a purchase." The man on the other end, accustomed to billion-dollar transactions, was momentarily silent. "A purchase, Elias? What kind of purchase?" "A small one," Elias had replied, "but an important one." Meanwhile, Croft was enjoying his victory. He saw Elias in the hallways and would give him a smug, triumphant grin. He was counting down the days until the handyman was gone. He saw the fight go out of the man, the way his shoulders slumped again, the way his eyes were permanently fixed on the floor. Croft mistook strategy for surrender. One afternoon, Lily found Elias changing a light bulb in the second-floor corridor. She ran up to him and hugged his leg. "Mommy said you have to leave," she said, her voice muffled against his work pants. "Is it because of the mean man?" Elias stopped what he was doing and knelt down to her level. He looked into her worried eyes. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "you have to leave a place before you can come back and make it better." "Are you coming back?" she asked, her lower lip trembling. "To make it better?" He felt a powerful surge of emotion, a protective instinct so fierce it almost staggered him. He put a hand on her small shoulder. "I promise," he said. "I'm going to fix it." It was a promise to a child, the most sacred kind there is, and it sealed his decision. There was no turning back. The day of his eviction arrived. It was a cold, grey morning. Croft was there personally to oversee it, a rare occurrence. He wanted to savor the moment. He stood with his arms crossed as Elias carried out his few belongings, a duffel bag of clothes, a small box with his hot plate, and a few utensils, and his toolbox. "Put it on the curb," Croft commanded, pointing. "City will pick it up if you don't." Elias said nothing. He placed his things neatly on the sidewalk. Clara and Lily were watching from their window on the third floor. He could feel their eyes on him. He saw Clara's pained expression, Lily's small hand pressed against the glass. It felt like a physical weight on his shoulders. "Well, Vance," Croft said, rocking back on his heels, "it's been a real pleasure. Don't let the door hit you on the way out." He grinned, revealing a row of stained teeth. Elias finally looked at him. He let his gaze drift from Croft's smug face to the crumbling facade of the building, to the dirty windows, the cracked front steps. He saw not just a building, but a home, a place of struggle, yes, but also a place where a mother read stories to her daughter, where neighbors shared plates of food, where life, however difficult, persisted. It deserved better. They deserved better. "You should have just fixed the pipes, Croft," Elias said, his voice even and low. Croft's grin faltered. "What did you say to me?" "I said," Elias repeated, turning to face him fully, "you should have fixed the pipes." Then he turned and walked away, leaving his meager possessions on the sidewalk. He did not look back. The next 24 hours were a blur of focused activity. He checked into a 5-star hotel under his real name, the concierge's eyes widening in recognition. The suite was larger than the entire first floor of the Emberside. The sudden plunge back into a world of luxury was jarring, disorienting. He ignored the floor-to-ceiling windows and the panoramic city view. He ignored the plush robes and the ridiculously overpriced room service menu. He took a long, hot shower, washing away 3 years of grime and anonymity. As the water sluiced over him, he felt as if he were shedding a skin. The handyman, the quiet tenant, the broken man, they were all dissolving, leaving behind the man who had built empires. Dressed in a pair of borrowed trousers and a shirt from the hotel gift shop, he met with his lawyer, a sharp, silver-haired man named Julian who had flown in on the red-eye. Julian's face was a mixture of shock and relief. "Elias," he breathed, shaking his head in disbelief, "we thought you were dead." Elias said, "I'm not anymore." He laid out the plan. It was simple, brutal, and swift. The shell corporation that owned the Emberside was a small, privately held entity with only one asset, the building itself. Croft was the sole shareholder. Julian's research, combined with Elias's own digging, had revealed that Croft was over-leveraged. He had multiple mortgages on the property and was facing pressure from his lenders. He was squeezing his tenants because he himself was being squeezed. He's desperate for cash, Julian concluded, looking over the files. We can make him an offer he can't refuse. An all-cash, no contingency offer, well above market value. We can close in a day. Do it, Elias said. And Julian, I want the offer to be anonymous. A numbered company out of Delaware. He can't know it's me. Not until the very end. The offer was made through a commercial real estate broker. As predicted, Croft, blinded by the sheer size of the number and the promise of immediate cash, jumped at it. He saw it as a winning lottery ticket, a solution to all his financial woes. He didn't question it. He didn't care who was buying. He just saw the dollar signs. The closing was scheduled for the following afternoon. Elias spent the morning with a personal shopper who outfitted him in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and shoes that cost more than a month's rent at the Emberside. Looking at himself in the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back. The haunted look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was a messy, emotional affair. This was about restoring order. It was about fixing what was broken. He felt a pang of despair, a wave of the old emptiness. He sat on the edge of a bed that cost more than a car, in a room that overlooked the entire city, and felt utterly alone. The suit felt like a costume. The power felt hollow. What was he doing? He was becoming the man he ran away from, a man who moved money and property like pieces on a board. He thought of Clara and Lily. He had made a promise to a little girl, but in fulfilling it, was he losing the part of himself they had connected with? The quiet handyman, the fixer of small things. His phone, a new one, buzzed. It was an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but some instinct made him answer. Hello, Elias. The voice was tiny, hesitant. It was Lily. His heart seized. Lily? How did you get this number? Your lawyer gave it to my mum, she whispered. Mummy is crying, the mean man. He put a paper on our door too. He said we have to leave. Elias closed his eyes. Croft hadn't wasted any time. He had retaliated against Clara for her loyalty to him. Lily, listen to me, he said, his voice low and urgent. It's going to be okay. I'm coming back. I'm coming to fix it. Just like I promised. Can you tell your mum that for me? You promise? She asked, her voice thick with tears. I promise, he said. He hung up the phone. The despair vanished, replaced by a white-hot certainty. This wasn't about restoring order. It wasn't about business. It was about protecting a family. It was about keeping a promise to a little girl. The suit was no longer a costume. It was his armor. He met the closing agent, a prim woman named Ms. Albright, in the lobby of the hotel. Everything is ready, Mr. Vance, she said, handing him a leather portfolio. The funds have been transferred. We have the final paperwork. All Mr. Croft needs to do is sign. Let's go, Elias said. The taxi ride to the Emberside felt surreal. He was returning to the place of his exile, but as its conqueror. As they pulled up to the curb, he saw his own duffel bag and box still sitting there, a sad monument to the man he had been just a day before. He and Ms. Albright walked up the cracked front steps and into the lobby. The familiar smell of damp wool and disinfectant hit him, but it smelled different now. It smelled like potential. Croft was in his basement office counting a stack of cash. He looked up, annoyed, as Elias and the well-dressed woman entered. His eyes widened in confusion when he saw Elias. Vance? What the hell are you doing here? And who is this? He looked Elias up and down, taking in the expensive suit. Did you come into some money? Here to beg for your apartment back. He laughed. Too late for that. Elias said nothing. He simply stood aside as Ms. Albright stepped forward and placed her briefcase on Croft's cluttered desk. Mr. Silas Croft, she asked, her voice crisp and professional. I am Ms. Albright. I'm the closing agent for the sale of this property. 1245 Ember Street. Croft's demeanor changed instantly. He straightened up, a greedy smile spreading across his face. "Ah, yes, of course. I've been expecting you. Is there a problem?" "No problem at all," Miss Albright said, opening her briefcase. "We just need your signature on the final transfer of title documents. The new owner is here to oversee the transaction." Croft looked around the small office, his eyes scanning past Elias as if he were invisible. "The new owner? Here where?" Elias took a single step forward. "Hello, Silas," he said, the color drained from Croft's face. He stared at Elias, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He looked from Elias's tailored suit to his calm, unreadable expression. The pieces began to click into place in his mind. But the picture they formed was so impossible, so ludicrous, that his brain refused to accept it. "You, Croft," sputtered, a strangled laugh escaping his throat. "You're the buyer. That's impossible. You're a handyman. You're broke. I just evicted you. I am the buyer," Elias confirmed, his voice devoid of emotion. "You were right. I did come into some money now, miss. Albright has the paperwork. I'd like to get this over with." Miss Albright, maintaining an admirable professional composure, pushed a document across the desk toward Croft. "If you could just sign here, Mr. Croft. It's the final deed of sale, transferring all rights and ownership of the property to—" She paused, glancing at a line on the paper. "To the Emberside Community Trust, for which Mr. Vance is the sole director." Croft stared at the paper, then back at Elias. The smugness, the cruelty, the petty tyranny. It all melted away, replaced by a raw, sputtering panic. "No. This is a joke. This has to be some kind of trick." "It's no trick," Elias said calmly. "You were offered a generous price for this building. You accepted. This is the part where you sign the papers and hand over the keys. Or," he added, his voice dropping slightly, "we can proceed to the litigation phase. My lawyer, Julian Croft, has already compiled a rather extensive file on your business practices. Building code violations, tenant harassment, fraudulent fees. I imagine the City Housing Authority would be very interested to read it. Your choice." The name of his own lawyer was a deliberate, cruel twist of the knife that Elias couldn't resist. Croft flinched as if struck. He looked at the contract, at the astronomical sum he was about to lose if he refused, and at the cold certainty in Elias's eyes. He was trapped. The predator had become the prey. With a trembling hand, Croft picked up the pen. His face was a mask of defeated fury. He scribbled his signature on the line, the ink bleeding slightly from the pressure. "There," he spat, throwing the pen down. "You've got your damn building." "I do," Elias agreed. He turned to Miss Albright. "Is the transaction complete?" "It is," she confirmed, gathering the papers. "The Emberside now belongs to you, Mr. Vance." Elias nodded. Then he turned his full attention back to Croft. "Now, for our first order of business. As the new owner, I am terminating your management contract, effective immediately. You have 1 hour to clear out your personal effects from this office. After that, you are to vacate the premises and not return. You are trespassing." Croft's jaw dropped. "You're firing me?" "I am," Elias said. "You should have fixed the pipes." Elias turned and walked out of the office, leaving Croft sitting there stunned and broken amidst the ruins of his petty kingdom. Miss Albright followed, a flicker of a smile on her face. Elias didn't stop in the lobby. He walked straight up the 3 flights of stairs to apartment 3C and knocked on the door. Clara opened it. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. She saw Elias, in his sharp suit, looking like a man from another world. Confusion warred with relief on her face. Behind her, Lily peeked out. "Elias," Clara whispered. "What's happening?" "Lily said you called." He looked past her and saw the eviction notice still taped to the inside of her door. He walked past her into the apartment, gently took the paper down, and tore it into 4 neat pieces. "That won't be necessary anymore," he said, his voice softer than it had been all day. "You're not going anywhere. No one is." Lily ran to him then, wrapping her arms around his legs in a fierce hug. "You fixed it! You fixed it!" Elias looked down at the top of her head, then up at Clara, whose eyes were filled with 1,000 questions. He reached down and rested his hand on Lily's hair, a gesture that felt more natural, more right, than signing any multi-million-dollar contract ever had. "I promised, didn't I?" he said to her, and then his eyes met Clara's. "I have a lot to explain." 1 year later, the Embaside was unrecognizable. The name remained, but its meaning had been transformed. It was no longer a place where hope went to die. It was a place where it was rekindled. The crumbling facade had been repaired and repointed, the dirty windows replaced, the leaky gutters fixed. A fresh coat of warm, inviting paint covered the once-stained brick. Inside, the hallways were bright and clean, the floors polished. The scent of mildew and disinfectant was gone, replaced by the faint, pleasant smell of new paint and the aroma of cooking that drifted from the apartments. The building was alive. Elias Vance had poured not just his money, but his soul into the project. He had personally overseen the renovations, his architectural genius reawakened and repurposed. He didn't build skyscrapers anymore. He built communities. The Embaside Community Trust had since acquired 3 other neglected buildings in the city, transforming them with the same philosophy. Safe, affordable, dignified housing. His dormant fortune was now a powerful engine for good. He had kept his old apartment, 1B. He had knocked down the wall that separated it from the adjacent unit, creating a bright, spacious community room and library for the building's residents. Shelves filled with books lined the walls, and comfortable chairs were arranged in cozy nooks. Children's artwork, vibrant and full of life, decorated the space. He often stood in the doorway, watching the children, Lily among them, reading and playing, and marveled at the change. The room that had been his prison was now a place of freedom and imagination for others. It was a perfect, beautiful irony. His own home was now apartment 3C. He stood by the window, looking down at the small, newly planted garden in the building's courtyard, another of his additions. He felt arms wrap around his waist from behind. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, resting her head against his back. He turned in her arms and smiled. The quiet, haunted handyman was gone forever. In his place was a man at peace, his eyes clear and full of a love that had healed him. "I was just thinking about a broken faucet," he said. She laughed, a warm, happy sound that filled the apartment. "That was a very expensive house call." "It was the best investment I ever made," he said, and he leaned down and kissed us. "Daddy Elias," Lily called from the living room floor, where she was meticulously building a tower of blocks. "Come see, I made a skyscraper." He looked at Clara, his heart full to bursting. He was no longer a ghost. He was a father. He was a partner. He was home. He walked over to Lily and knelt beside her, admiring her creation. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's the best one I've ever seen." He had been thrown out, a man deemed worthless, discarded over a petty sum. But in being cast out, he had found the path back to himself. He had lost a tiny, empty room and gained a universe. He hadn't just bought a building. He had reclaimed his life, building it anew on a foundation stronger than steel or concrete. He had built it on a promise to a child, on an act of kindness, and on the transformative power of a love he never thought he deserved. He was Elias Vance, the fixer of broken things, and he was finally whole.